The story begins not with the roar of engines, but with a stillness that feels almost sacred. In the early 1940s, the Pennsylvania Turnpike was America's first superhighway, a ribbon of asphalt slicing through the Appalachian mountains. Trucks up steep grades, their headlights cutting through swirling mist, their brakes singing on long descents. For the men who drove them, these tunnels were both promise and peril. Feats of engineering that offered a route across the mountains, yet demanded every ounce of skill and nerve. The tunnels themselves, concrete tubes burrowing into dark rock, were narrow, damp, and echoing. Truckers spoke in hushed tones about the hum of engines bouncing off the walls, about the shadows that seemed to twist and stretch with the headlights. According to period accounts, accidents were frequent, not just from speed, but from the psychological weight of driving through darkness mile after mile. Yet there was camaraderie too. Drivers swapped tips at roadside diners, shared warnings about slick curves and the fickle mountain fog, and recounted the voices they sometimes heard in the tunnels. Wind, machinery, maybe something else entirely. Construction crews had carved these passages with dynamite and steel. They're etched in every bolt and beam. Records suggest some sections collapsed temporarily, delaying the highway's opening, yet the state pushed forward, believing the turnpike was a vital artery for commerce and mobility. The trucks that followed were not sleek or forgiving. They were heavy, gas-guzzling beasts, with suspensions that rattled and strained against the mountain's spine. Drivers learned to respect both machine and mountain, understanding that a single could send freight tumbling into the gorge below. By the 1950s, the tunnels had become a passage not just of commerce, but of memory. Truckers spoke of ghostly figures glimpsed in the peripheral gloom, of brakes squealing without cause, of a cold draft that seemed to follow from one portal to the next. Some dismissed these stories as fatigue, others as superstition, but every veteran knew the tunnels demanded humility. And when the turnpike was eventually realigned in the 1960s, leaving these tubes abandoned, those whispers lingered. Old truckers told tales of phantom rigs, lights that blinked in the empty darkness, engines that roared without fuel. The tunnels were no longer a conduit for freight alone. They became a repository for memory, a place where the past seemed to breathe in the cool, damp air. Driving through them today, the silence is almost complete. Concrete walls scarred by time, rusted signage, and cracked pavement evoke both awe and melancholy. Yet, even in abandonment, there is a strange intimacy. One can imagine a rig's headlights glinting off wet stone, a driver gripping the wheel with hands calloused by decades on the road, speaking softly to the empty tunnel as if it were a companion. Here, in the dark passages of the Pennsylvania Turnpike, America's truckers left more than cargo. They left a part of themselves, echoing still in every footstep, every ghostly hum, every shadow cast by the dim light of memory. By the early 1960s, the Pennsylvania Turnpike had grown too narrow, too dangerous for the increasing flood of post-war traffic. Trucks that once threw the tunnels now faced modern demands: loads, higher speeds, and stricter schedules. The state made a difficult decision: bypass the tunnels, widen the road, and leave these concrete passages to the shadows. For truckers, the news was bittersweet. The new alignment promised safety and efficiency, yet it erased a familiar rhythm, the kind forged by miles of hum, sweat, and focus within those echoing tubes. The abandoned tunnels quickly became a place of silence, but not emptiness. Drivers who had spent decades threading their rigs through the narrow corridors spoke of a strange attachment, a sense that these tunnels carried pieces of their lives. Stories circulated in truck stops about phantom trucks, headlights flickering, brakes squealing, engines roaring from deep within the concrete. Some men, now retired, swore the tunnels whispered the names of those who had passed through them. Records suggest at least a dozen accidents went unreported in the last years before the bypass, fueling a sense of mystery, a superstition that clung to the damp, shadowed walls. Trucking culture, already intimate and solitary, found a peculiar kind of reverence in these abandoned passages. Veteran drivers recalled the dark stretches where mountain fog pressed against windshield and steel, where each mile demanded honed by experience. One driver, known only in memoirs as Old Joe, described a night when his rig's lights reflected off water dripping from the ceiling, making the tunnel seem alive, almost breathing. Another spoke of the sensation of passing a phantom rig, a memory or a shadow perhaps, that mirrored his own truck in every detail. These were not tales spun for entertainment. They were the language of men who had trusted their lives to the road, who had learned that concrete and darkness could hold stories as profound as any town or city. As years passed, the tunnels became a repository for both history and imagination. Urban explorers later discovered graffiti, remnants of bolt holes and scaffolding, the faint aroma of diesel lingering as if the trucks had never left. Nature crept into the abandoned spaces, moss clinging to the walls, small animals making homes in the corners, water pooling where engines once roared. Yet for the truckers who remembered, the tunnels were haunted not by spectres alone, but by memory itself. The cold draft of forgotten journeys, the echo of engines and laughter, the camaraderie of shared danger and triumph. Visiting today, one feels the weight of time pressing against the ribs of the mountain. Every step echoes off concrete that once carried freight and fear alike. Even in silence, the tunnels speak, of ambition and of men and machines intertwined, of a highway that promised progress and delivered memory. For the old truckers, and those who listen closely, the dark passages of the Pennsylvania Turnpike remain a quiet monument to perseverance, a place where the past lingers not as ghostly spectacle, but as a deeply human imprint, a reflection of courage, routine, and the unspoken bonds forged in the dim glow of a rig's headlights. Before the tunnels fell silent, there was a time when they pulsed with life, a golden age etched into the rhythm of steel and asphalt. In the 1950s, the Pennsylvania Turnpike was more than a road. It was a lifeline connecting cities, towns, and the people who moved between them. Truckers carried freight essential to the nation, coal for factories, milk for towns, machinery for farms. Each run was a test of skill, patience, and nerve, particularly in the tunnels where a single could turn a routine trip into tragedy. Inside the cab, a driver learned to listen. The whine of gears climbing the mountain, the change in engine pitch as the rig entered the darkness, the faint echo of other trucks in the opposite lane. Veteran drivers recall a shared code of respect. One would slow to avoid encroaching into the narrow tunnel. One would signal with horn or lights. There was no room for ego, only for experience and caution. Period accounts describe drivers sleeping little, eating quickly at roadside diners, and stories that blurred the line between legend and memory. In those tales, the tunnels became almost sentient, holding secrets of the mountains, of men, and of machines alike. Some drivers carried cameras or journals, recording the unusual beauty of the turnpike in fog or snow. The tunnels themselves were engineering marvels, arched ceilings of reinforced concrete, ventilation shafts to clear smoke, emergency alcoves hidden in the darkness. They demanded respect not just for their design, but for the environment that bore them. Snowstorms could reduce visibility to a few feet, while heavy freight trucks tested every curve and grade. The golden age of trucking was one of intimacy with the road. Drivers felt each vibration, each shift in weight, each echo within the tunnel walls. Yet, there was an undercurrent of melancholy even in those years. Drivers spoke quietly about colleagues lost to accidents, about trucks swallowed by ice or fog, about the relentless pressure of schedules that left little time for family. Some swore they felt presences in the tunnels, subtle reminders of danger and mortality. These were not idle ghost stories. They were lessons learned through experience, carried in the hands, eyes, and hearts of those who trusted their lives to steel, rubber, and concrete. The roadside economy thrived alongside this human drama. Diners, motels, and gas stations owed their survival to the constant procession of rigs and cars. Truckers, routines shaped towns. Fueling stations stayed open late, mechanics worked nights, and small diners became of camaraderie, laughter, and the occasional solemn remembrance. The tunnels in this context were more than obstacles, they were thresholds. Each successful crossing brought relief, pride, and a quiet sense of accomplishment. Looking back, one sees that era as a delicate balance between achievement and vulnerability. The turnpike's tunnels demanded courage, fostered community, and preserved memory. They were a place where the nations and ambition intersected, where the human spirit, guided by headlights and trust, carried both cargo and hope through the dark Appalachian heart of Pennsylvania. Even now, decades later, those who remember that golden age speak of it not in brash terms, but with reverence. A time when the road tested men, forged bonds, and whispered its stories into every echoing passage. The decline of the tunnels came quietly, yet it was inevitable. By the early 1960s, traffic had grown beyond what the original design could safely accommodate. The tunnels, once celebrated feats of engineering, became bottlenecks, shadows of their former glory. Trucks grew, engines louder, and schedules tighter. What had once been a challenge met with skill became a source of stress, danger, and for some, dread. Veteran drivers remember the strain in their hands, the constant vigilance in their eyes, and the quiet prayers muttered beneath breaths by exhaust. When the state announced the bypass, rerouting the turnpike around the tunnels, it marked the end of an era. Men who had spent decades threading rigs through dark concrete passages felt a profound sense of loss. The tunnels, now abandoned, seemed to mourn with them. Truckers recounted the strange experience of driving past the entrances for the last time. The familiar archways now dark, the faint echo of past engines lingering like a memory that refused to fade. Records suggest a handful of trucks still ventured inside unofficially, testing the empty tubes, but the practice was dangerous, sometimes fatal, and increasingly rare. In the years that followed, the abandoned tunnels acquired a reputation beyond the practical. Local law painted them as haunted, a place where the spirits of drivers, machines, and mountain itself intertwined. Old truckers told stories of phantom lights that followed rigs, of brakes squealing for no reason, of echoes that repeated their own words back to them in distorted whispers. Some dismissed these tales as fatigue or imagination. Others, having spent countless hours in the cab, insisted they were real. According to period accounts, even engineers who revisited the tunnels felt an uneasy presence, as if the mountain itself remembered every truck that had passed through its dark heart. Explorers and adventurers later found the tunnels overgrown with moss, water pooling in deepened cracks, rust creeping along steel supports. Yet despite decay, the human imprint remained. Graffiti marking names and dates, scraps of wood or metal where equipment had once rested, faint tire marks tracing old paths. Truckers who visited decades later described a visceral sensation, the weight of memory pressing against them. The tunnels were no longer conduits for freight. They had become cathedrals of experience, repositories for stories of courage, endurance, and the relentless march of time. Even in abandonment, the tunnels preserved the essence of those who had traversed them. Each echo, each shadowed corner, spoke of hands gripping steering wheels, eyes scanning darkness, hearts measuring courage against fear. The mountain and its hollowed passages bore witness to a generation of truckers who had shaped America's commerce and culture, who had lived close to danger, and who had left behind traces of their lives and their quiet heroism. In the hushed stillness of the old turnpike tunnels, one feels not just absence, but presence, the lingering pulse of the road, the mountain, and the men who never forgot the dark passages they once called home. Today, the tunnels of the abandoned Pennsylvania Turnpike exist in a curious state, half relic, half living memory. Nature has crept in where asphalt once bore the weight of freight. Moss carpets the walls, and water drips from ceilings like a slow metronome, counting the years since engines last roared through these passages. Yet despite decay, the tunnels pulse with stories. Modern explorers speak of a palpable weight in the air, an echo of headlights, brakes, and voices long gone. Some say they feel the presence of the truckers who once navigated these dark corridors with skill, patience, and a quiet courage. Preservationists and historians have begun to recognize the significance of these tunnels not as mere concrete tubes, but as monuments to a bygone era of American mobility. Records suggest engineers still marvel at the audacity of construction, the way the tunnels carve through solid rock, and the vision required to imagine a highway connecting the state coast to coast. Veterans recall that every bolt, every curve, and every mile of straightaway carried the weight of human ingenuity, and those memories are etched not just in blueprints, but in the hands and hearts of men who drove through mist, snow, and darkness, often alone, often tested by mountain and machine alike. Truckers' stories remain central to this legacy. One retired driver, remembering a winter night in the mid-1950s, spoke of a runaway truck sliding perilously along a slick incline, saved only by skill honed over years and instinct sharpened by repeated passage through these tunnels. Another recounted the camaraderie at roadside diners, where tales of near misses and mountain fog were shared with wry and solemn nods. These narratives remind us that the turnpike was never simply concrete and asphalt. It was of human, of resilience, of lives intertwined with the pulse of the road. The tunnels have also become a quiet canvas for reflection. Artists, photographers, and writers are drawn to the way light filters through broken ventilation grates, the way shadows stretch across the wet, scarred surfaces, and the way the mountain seems to remember the rhythm of wheels and engines. For older generations who remember driving these corridors, the echoes serve as portals back to a formative time, a period when men measured their skill against the darkness and emerged, if lucky, wiser, steadier, and more respectful of the mountain and its demands. Even as the Pennsylvania Turnpike continues to evolve, the abandoned tunnels endure as a repository of collective memory. They the ingenuity of engineers, the courage of truckers, and the silent perseverance of a generation who trusted their lives to the road. In their quiet decay, the tunnels teach a profound lesson. Progress is measured not only in new asphalt or wider lanes, but in the human stories that every mile carries. The dark passages may no longer bear freight, yet they continue to transport memory of sweat, courage, camaraderie, and the enduring spirit of the men who once called them home. The story of the Pennsylvania Turnpike tunnels concludes not with fanfare, but with quiet reflection. Decades after the last rig rumbled through their concrete corridors, the tunnels remain a testament to both human ambition and the impermanence of even our greatest achievements. They stand as silent witnesses to a generation of truckers whose lives were measured in miles, who navigated darkness with skill, patience, and a stubborn courage that often went unrecorded in official histories. For those who remember, entering the tunnels is like stepping into a memory. The damp air clings to the skin, echo carries footsteps and faint drips of water, and shadows linger as if reluctant to let go. Veteran truckers speak of headlights flickering in the distance, a brake squeal just beyond hearing, or the inexplicable sensation of being followed by a presence both tangible and elusive. These are not tales crafted for sensation. They are the imprint of countless journeys, of lives intertwined with the pulse of the road, the weight of freight, and the mountain's immutable will. Preservationists and historians have documented these passages, rusted signs, cracked concrete, and graffiti left by curious explorers. Yet the most important record resides in memory itself, in the stories passed from one driver to another, in photographs tucked away in attics, in journals that speak of long nights, cold steel cabins, and the hum of engines in the dark. These recollections remind us that history is lived as much as it is built. The tunnels were never merely concrete and stone. They were for courage, endurance, and human connection, demanding reverence for both the men who on them and the mountains that held them. Walking through these abandoned passages today, one senses a rhythm, a cadence of trucks that once navigated steep grades, a whisper of tires on slick concrete, a hum of engines long silenced. There is melancholy here, yes, but also a strange warmth. The tunnels embody the duality of the American road, the promise of progress and the shadow of impermanence, the exhilaration of movement and the solemn weight of memory. In them, we the men who braved every curve, every drop of fog, every dark mile, and carried forward a nation's commerce, culture, and unspoken heroism. Ultimately, the tunnels are more than relics. They are corridors of memory, teaching patience, humility, and respect for the fragile beauty of human. They remind us that every mile traveled, every load delivered, every story shared over a diner coffee or whispered beneath the glow of a rig's dashboard contributes to a larger American narrative. And though the Pennsylvania Turnpike tunnels now lie in shadow, their legacy endures in echoes of engines, in flickers of light, in the hearts of truckers past and present. In the dark passages, one finds not fear but remembrance, a quiet, enduring tribute to those who trusted the road, the mountain, and their own hands to carry them safely through.